You know, sometimes the good Lord puts folks in our path for a reason, even when it seems like the worst kind of trouble. Reminds me of old Elias Ward, a rancher I knew back in Apache country, stubborn as a fence post and twice as weathered. The kind of man who'd rather wrestle a rattlesnake than ask for help. Been working his spread alone for near 20 years after his wife passed, and seemed content enough with just his cattle and the wide open sky for company. Until that scorching afternoon when he found that Apache woman half dead in the scrub near his south pasture. Now, in those days, finding yourself between an Apache and their people was about as safe as standing between a mama bear and her cubs. But sometimes a man's got to do what his conscience tells him, no matter what common sense might say. The choice Elias made that day would test everything he believed about himself and the life he'd built. And I reckon you'll want to hear how it turned out. The summer of '78 was one of the worst droughts to hit Apache country in living memory. Elias Ward stood atop his windmill tower, squinting against the merciless sun as he wrestled with a stubborn gear assembly. Sweat carved muddy trails through the dust on his leathered face, dripping onto hands cross-hatched with the scars of 20 years hard ranching. "Dadgummit," he muttered, knuckles bleeding as the wrench slipped again. "Ain't getting any younger for this foolishness." Below, his old mare Sadie nickered softly, as if agreeing with his assessment. Elias glanced down at her with unexpected tenderness. "Just a few more minutes, old girl. Can't have the cattle going thirsty on account of one ornery bearing." The metal finally yielded with a reluctant groan. Elias gave a grunt of satisfaction as the windmill blades caught the faint breeze and began their slow, rhythmic turning. Water soon trickled into the bone-dry tank below. He climbed down carefully, each movement deliberate and practiced. At 58, Elias wasn't young anymore, but there wasn't a job on the ranch he couldn't handle alone. Hadn't been, not since Caroline passed nearly 2 decades ago. His fingers brushed unconsciously against the worn gold band still circling his left hand. "Another day, another dollar," he murmured, an old habit from when she'd ask about his day. Some conversations a man just couldn't bear to end, even when they were talking to ghosts. Sadie nudged his shoulder as he reached the ground. "I know," he said, patting her sun-warmed neck. "Time to head back. Still got that south fence to check before sundown." The ranch house sat a mile away, a weathered but well-maintained structure surrounded by cottonwoods Elias had planted as saplings when he and Caroline first claimed this land. Nothing fancy, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was paid for, every board and nail, with the sweat of his brow and the stubborn determination that defined him. 3 days later, Elias rode into town for his monthly supplies. Mason Creek wasn't much, a general store, saloon, small church, and scattering of homes, but it served the ranchers and farmers spread across the territory. "Morning, Elias," called Jackson Miller, as the bell above his store door announced a customer. The shopkeeper was arranging canned goods on a high shelf, his round face flushed with the effort. "Right on schedule, as usual." "Jackson?" Elias nodded, pulling a carefully written list from his pocket. "Need the usual, plus extra coffee if you've got it." "Just got a shipment yesterday. Must have known you were coming." Jackson grinned, climbing down from his step-stool. "How's that windmill holding up?" "Fixed that bearing yet?" "Done and done." Elias began gathering items from his list, comfortable with the store's layout after years of patronage. "Needs some more fence wire, too. South section's looking weak." As Jackson tallied his purchases, the door opened again. Sheriff Tanner entered, removing his hat in the relative cool of the store. "Elias," he nodded, "thought that was your horse outside." "Sheriff." Elias acknowledged him with the same economical courtesy. "Been meaning to ride out your way. Army sent word there's been Apache movement along Whitewater Creek. Might want to keep your rifle handy." Jackson paused his counting. "Trouble?" "Nothing specific," Tanner shrugged. "Just the usual territorial disputes. Droughts got everyone pushing boundaries for water." Elias continued selecting his supplies without visible concern. "Apache's got as much right to water as anyone in a drought. They stay on their side of the creek, I'll stay on mine." "That kind of thinking'll get your scalp lifted, Ward," Tanner said, shaking his head. "These ain't the friendly kind." "Known a few Apache in my time," Elias replied evenly. "No different than white folks, some good, some bad, most just trying to get by." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Holloway, an elderly widow struggling through the door with an empty feed sack. "Morning, gentlemen," she nodded, then frowned at a posted notice. "Jackson, these prices gone up again?" Before Jackson could respond, Elias moved to help her with the heavy burlap sack she was attempting to fill with cornmeal. "Let me get that for you, ma'am," he said, taking over the task with quiet efficiency. "Much obliged, Elias," she smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "These old bones don't cooperate like they used to." "Don't we all know it?" he replied, filling her sack with practiced movements. The small kindness wasn't remarkable, just the expected behavior of a man raised to respect his elders. But it revealed something essential about Elias Ward that his taciturn manner often concealed. Beneath the weathered exterior beat a heart that understood responsibility toward others, however much he might prefer his solitude. The return journey took longer than usual. Elias deliberately kept Sadie at an easy walk, mindful of the loaded pack-horse behind them. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, the air so dry it seemed to pull moisture from a man's very bones. As they approached the south pasture boundary, Sadie suddenly tensed, ears pricked forward. "What is it, girl?" Elias murmured, instantly alert. The mare snorted, refusing to move further. Years of frontier living had taught Elias to trust an animal's instincts. He eased his Winchester from its scabbard, scanning the terrain with narrowed eyes. That's when he noticed the buzzard circling lazily over the scrub brush 100 yards east. Could be a dead calf, but his gut said otherwise. "Easy now," he soothed Sadie, tying both horses to a mesquite and approaching on foot. The ground told its own story. Disturbed earth, smears of dried blood, marks of a body being dragged. Not animal tracks either, human. Following the sign cautiously, rifle ready, Elias pushed through the brittle brush until he found her. An Apache woman, perhaps 30 years old, lay curled against a boulder. Her face was bruised almost beyond recognition, clothing torn and bloodied. But she was breathing, shallow, ragged breaths that spoke of remarkable tenacity. Elias stood motionless, assessing the situation with the calculating eye of a man who'd survived frontier life through caution as much as courage. Being found with an injured Apache woman was about as safe as sleeping in a rattlesnake den. Yet he couldn't leave her. Whatever had happened, whatever she might have done, nobody deserved to die slow under this merciless sun. "Don't speak your tongue," he said quietly, though he doubted she could hear him. "But I reckon hurt is the same in any language." He crouched beside her, offering his canteen. At the moisture against her cracked lips, her eyes fluttered open, dark, pain-filled, but suddenly alert with fear. She tried to scramble away, a small knife appearing in her trembling hand. "Not gonna harm you," Elias said, raising his palms to show he meant no threat. "But you need help, or you won't see another sunrise." The woman stared at him, comprehension gradually replacing fear as she processed his words. When she finally spoke, her English was broken but clear enough. "They come for me. Kill you, too." Elias nodded, understanding the warning. Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried. He carefully extended the canteen again. "Let's get you to the house before we worry about who's coming after." After a long, tense moment, she lowered the knife and accepted the water. The choice was made. Whatever consequences would follow, Elias Ward had committed himself to a path from which there was no easy return. 3 days passed before Takina could sit up without assistance. Elias had cleaned and bandaged her wounds as best he could with his limited medical knowledge, working with quiet efficiency and careful respect for her modesty. The bruises on her face had deepened to purple-black, but the swelling had begun to subside. She'd accepted his help with wary gratitude, saying little beyond what was necessary. Dawn of the 4th day broke clear and cool, a brief respite from the relentless heat. Elias was changing the bandage on Takina's arm when he noticed the ranch dog, an aging blue heeler named Buck, suddenly stiffen on the porch. The animal's ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Stay put," Elias told Takina, reaching for his rifle. "We've got company." Outside, the morning had gone strangely quiet. No bird song, no insect hum, just the nervous shuffle of horses in the corral and Buck's continuous growl. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready, and scanned the landscape with practiced eyes. A lone rider appeared on the ridge to the east, silhouetted against the rising sun. The figure sat motionless for several moments, then began a deliberate approach. As the distance closed, Elias could make out the distinctive features of an Apache scout. A young man, perhaps 30, riding without saddle or bridle in the Apache way. The visitor stopped a respectful distance from the house. Dismounting with fluid grace, he stood beside his horse, making no move toward weapon or threat, but his posture conveyed unmistakable authority. "I come to speak with the rancher Elias Ward," he called in clear, slightly accented English. "You found him," Elias replied evenly, not moving from the porch. "State your business." The scout approached several more paces, then stopped again. "I am Nakohe of the Chiricahua. We have traded in the past." Recognition dawned. "The horse trader, 5 years back." Nakohe nodded once. "You have fair memory, like you have fair prices." His expression hardened. "But today I come with warning, not trade." "About the woman," Elias said, not a question. "The woman, Takina, has been cast out. She brings dishonor to any roof that shelters her." Elias's face remained impassive. "Where I come from, we don't leave folks to die in the desert, no matter what they've done." Nakohe's eyes narrowed slightly. "What she has done is fail her purpose. What you have done is interfere in matters not yours to judge." "Didn't judge anything," Elias replied. "Just couldn't ride past someone beaten half to death." Judgment wasn't part of it. The scout studied him, something like reluctant respect flickering across his features. "This is not your affair, rancher. I remember you as a fair trader. Do not make yourself an enemy of the people." "Not looking for trouble," Elias said, his voice level. "But long as she's under my roof, she's under my protection. That's just how it is." Nakohe was silent for several moments, visibly weighing his next words. "The elders say a woman who bears no children has no purpose among the people. 3 husbands, no children. The spirits have spoken." Seems the spirits had plenty to say without adding fists to the conversation, Elias observed dryly. A flash of something, possibly agreement, crossed Nakohe's face before he controlled it. You speak boldly for a man alone against many. Been alone a long time, Elias shrugged. Gets to be a habit. Nakohe mounted his horse in one fluid motion. I have delivered the warning as required. What follows is not my choice. He paused, then added, 3 days, rancher. The council will decide. With that, he wheeled his horse and rode away, disappearing over the ridge as suddenly as he had appeared. Elias watched until he was certain the scout was truly gone before returning inside. Takina sat exactly where he'd left her, rigid with tension, dark eyes searching his face. They come for me, she stated flatly. Not today, Elias replied, setting his rifle aside and returning to the interrupted bandaging. Got 3 days, according to your friend out there. Not friend. Nakohe is my cousin's husband. Her hands twisted in her lap. He was kind once, before. Elias finished securing the bandage before responding. He remembered me. That's something, at least. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. By evening, Takina had managed to help prepare a simple meal of beans and cornbread, her movements stiff but determined. They ate in silence until Elias finally spoke. Might be time you told me what happened. Whole story. Takina stared into her bowl for a long moment. I am barren, she said finally, her voice so low he barely caught the words. No children come from me. Woman with no children has no purpose to Apache. Elias nodded slowly. That why they beat you? Third husband put me away. Said I bring bad spirits to his lodge. Her fingers touched her bruised face unconsciously. His brothers did this. Then council say I must leave people forever. Seems mighty harsh for something you can't help. Takina's eyes flashed with momentary anger. Apache way. Woman must continue the people, or she is not truly woman. Elias considered this, chewing thoughtfully. Seems to me every soul has purpose, children or not. My Caroline and I never had young'uns ourselves. Surprise registered on Takina's face. Your people not cast out woman who bears no fruit? Some might gossip, but nobody's throwing anyone to the wolves over it. Different ways, I reckon. He took a sip of coffee. Caroline couldn't have children, knew it before we married. Didn't make her any less in my eyes. Takina studied him with newfound curiosity. Why you take woman who cannot give sons? Loved her, Elias said simply. Rest didn't matter much. They lapsed into silence again, but something had shifted between them, a small bridge of understanding, where before there had been only wary necessity. Finally, Takina spoke again, her voice stronger. I bring death to your home. Why you help? Elias considered the question seriously before answering. Man's gotta answer to his conscience before anything else. Couldn't live with myself if I'd left you out there. The next morning broke with heavy clouds building to the west, the promise of rain that might or might not deliver. Elias found Takina already awake, standing at the window, watching the distant storm front. Need to prepare, she said without turning. They will come at dawn, always at dawn. Elias nodded, impressed by her practical focus despite her injuries. Let's see what we can do then. The day became a careful inventory of resources. Elias checked and cleaned each firearm, explaining their placement and use to Takina. He showed her the root cellar where she could hide if necessary, the quickest route to the creek if escape became their only option. For her part, Takina revealed unexpected strength during these preparations. Though still weak, she moved with increasing confidence, her eyes alert and mind sharp. At midday, she disappeared briefly into the scrub near the house, returning with several plants Elias didn't recognize. "This plant, crush leaves put on wounds, Apache medicine," she explained, demonstrating the technique. "Good for stopping blood." Elias examined the poultice with genuine interest. "Well now, that's right useful. Reckon we both might have something to teach each other." "You have medicine?" she asked. "Got whiskey and willow bark," he shrugged. "Not much else. Been meaning to learn more of the local plants, just never took the time." Takana nodded, then hesitated before asking, "If they come, you fight before with Apache?" Elias continued organizing ammunition as he answered. "Traded mostly, fought some, made peace after. That's usually how it goes out here." The storm clouds continued to build throughout the afternoon, mirroring the tension that gathered around the small ranch. By evening, the wind had picked up, bending the cottonwoods and bringing the scent of distant rain. As darkness fell, Elias secured the house for the night, double-checking doors and windows. Takina watched his movements with quiet attention. "Why you not afraid?" she asked finally. Elias paused, considering her question. "Didn't say I wasn't afraid. Just don't see the point in showing it." "But you stay. Could send me away. Save yourself." "Could," he acknowledged. "But then I'd have to live with that choice." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming. Best get some rest while we can." Later, as rain finally began to patter against the roof, Elias lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm. 3 days, Nakohe had said. 3 days before whatever decision the Apache Council made would be carried out. A sensible man would pack up and leave before then, take the woman somewhere safe, or send her on her way with supplies. But Elias Ward had spent too many years on this frontier to believe running solved anything. Sometimes a man had to plant his feet and stand his ground, even when common sense said otherwise. It wasn't bravery so much as stubborn principle, the same quality that had kept him working this hard land long after more sensible folks had moved on to easier prospects. Outside, the storm gathered strength, wind driving rain against the windows in fierce gusts. Somewhere in the darkness, Takina too lay awake, listening to the same storm, facing the same uncertain future. Two strangers bound together by one simple choice, the choice to recognize another's humanity when it would have been far easier to look away. The storm that had threatened all day broke just before midnight, attacking the ranch with a fury rarely seen even in this land of extremes. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire, driven nearly horizontal by gusting winds that howled around the eaves and rattled the windows in their frames. Elias had been through worse, but not many. He stood at the window, watching lightning split the sky, counting the seconds between flash and thunder to gauge the storm's distance. Getting closer. "Bad spirits angry," Takina observed from the doorway, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the sudden chill. "Just weather," Elias replied, though he understood the sentiment. Something did feel personal about the storm's ferocity, as though nature itself objected to their unlikely alliance. A sharp crack, followed by the sound of splintering wood, brought them both fully alert. "Barn roof," Elias muttered, already reaching for his slicker. "South corner's been weak." Takina moved to follow him, but he shook his head. "Stay put. You're not strong enough yet." "Rain, not care if I strong enough," she replied simply, grabbing a second oilcloth coat from its peg. Outside, the full force of the storm hit them like a physical blow. They staggered through churning mud toward the barn, where panicked whinnies from the horses rose above the wind's howl. A section of the roof had indeed partially collapsed, sending water cascading onto the frightened animals below. "Get the horses to the north stalls!" Elias shouted over the din, already climbing the ladder to the hayloft. The old wound in his side, from a long-ago Comanche arrow, protested sharply, but he ignored it. In the dim light of a swinging lantern, he could see the main support beam had split where rot had weakened it. The remaining roof section groaned ominously, ready to give way at any moment. "Need to brace this before the whole thing goes," he called down to Takina, who had managed to calm the horses with remarkable speed. She looked up, assessing the situation with quick intelligence. Elias wedged himself against the beam, trying to hold it steady while reaching for the toolbox he kept in the loft. A sudden shift sent a searing pain through his side, and he felt the warm wetness of blood as the old wound reopened. "Roof won't hold if we don't get those supports up," he grunted, face tight with pain. Takina had already climbed up beside him, moving with unexpected agility despite her recent injuries. She took one look at his blood-stained shirt and shook her head. "You bleed too much, cannot climb." "Ain't got much choice unless you know how to—" he began, but stopped as she was already gathering fallen boards and the hammer from his toolbox. "My father built many shelters. I watch, I learn," she said matter-of-factly. "You tell me how, I do." Elias hesitated only briefly before nodding. "We need to sister a new beam alongside the cracked one. There's a 2x6 over by the hatch." They worked in desperate harmony, Elias directing while Takina executed with surprising skill. Her methods were different. She secured the boards with an intricate lashing technique rather than nails where the wood was too wet, but the results held firm. Within 20 minutes, they had stabilized the roof enough to withstand the storm's assault. By the time they finished, both were soaked to the skin despite the slickers, and Elias's side was burning with pain. As they made their way back to the house, a flash flood had cut across the path, turning the ground between barn and house into a churning stream nearly knee-deep. "Careful," Elias warned, but even as he spoke, his boot slipped on the submerged ground. He would have fallen if Takina hadn't caught his arm with surprising strength, steadying him with a grip like iron. "You help me, I help you," she said simply, and together they waded through the torrent to the relative safety of the porch. Inside, Elias collapsed into a chair, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. The bleeding from his side had worsened, and fever had begun to brighten his eyes with unnatural sharpness. "Old wound," he explained tersely when Takina examined it. "Comanche arrow, 15 years back." "Never did heal right." Takina said nothing, but her expression was grim as she gathered supplies from her small bundle of possessions. With methodical efficiency, she cleaned the wound, then applied a poultice of herbs she'd gathered earlier. "This fight infection," she explained, working with practiced hands, "need more medicine." She disappeared briefly into the storm, returning with additional plants that she crushed into a strong-smelling paste. The mixture burned when applied, but Elias didn't flinch. "Had worse," he murmured, though his voice had grown weaker. By midnight, the fever had taken firm hold. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness as Takina maintained a quiet vigil beside him. In his delirium, past and present blurred. He was back in the war, then tracking Comanche raiders, then holding Caroline's hand as she slipped away from him. "Should have been me," he muttered at one point, thrashing against imagined restraints. "Should have been me, not her." Takina held a cool cloth to his forehead, murmuring soft words in her native tongue. Eventually she began to sing, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to flow with the sound of the rain. The melody was unlike anything Elias had ever heard, rising and falling like the wind itself, ancient words carrying some power he couldn't understand, but somehow felt. In a moment of clarity, he opened his eyes. Caroline, that you singing, darlin'? Not Caroline, Takina replied gently. Be still. Medicine work better when body rests. Should have left, he mumbled, slipping back toward delirium. Safer for you. Apache not abandon those who show true heart, she said firmly. Sleep now. I keep watch. Through the long night, Takina never left his side. She bathed his fevered skin with cool water, changed the poultice when needed, and continued her healing songs whenever the nightmares seemed to take him. Outside, the storm gradually spent its fury, thunder moving further away, until only the steady rhythm of rain remained. She could have left. The thought occurred to her more than once as she watched over the unconscious rancher. With him incapacitated, and the Apache Council's judgment still 2 days away, she could take a horse and supplies and be far from here by dawn. Perhaps find sanctuary in one of the white settlements to the east, or with another tribe that might accept a skilled healer despite her barrenness. But she remained. This man had risked everything for a stranger, defied his own people's warnings, and now suffered for his kindness. Such honor could not be repaid with abandonment. Dawn broke with surprising gentleness after the night's violence. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and Elias's fever had finally broken. He slept naturally now, his breathing deep and even. Takina checked his wound one last time. The angry redness had receded, and no fresh bleeding had occurred. Satisfied her patient would survive, she slipped outside. The storm had left chaos in its wake, branches down, corral fencing damaged, and the south pasture partially flooded. But it had also brought life to the parched land. Already the desert plants were unfurling, reaching toward the moisture with almost visible eagerness. Takina moved with purpose, gathering food and checking the animals. By the time the sun had fully risen, she had repaired the minor damage to the corral, collected fresh eggs from the henhouse, and shot a rabbit with Elias's spare rifle. The animal was quickly skinned and prepared according to Apache custom, with thanks offered to its spirit for the sustenance it provided. Inside, she found Elias awake and struggling to sit up. He looked at her with surprise as she entered carrying food and fresh medicine. "Thought you might have taken the opportunity to clear out," he said, his voice rough but stronger than the night before. "Would not be honorable," she replied simply, helping him sit against the pillows before offering a cup of broth. Elias studied her as he drank. "You've got skills I never would have expected." "All Apache women learn to hunt, heal, build," she said with quiet pride, "not just for making babies." An unexpected chuckle escaped him, surprising them both. "Reckon I had some wrong ideas about your people." The corner of Takina's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "And I about white men. Maybe we both learn." They shared a simple breakfast, the quiet between them comfortable now rather than wary. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, the air fresh with the scent of rain-soaked earth and new growth. "We should check the south pasture," Elias said, attempting to stand. Takina placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I already check. Fence need fixing, but cattle safe on high ground." He settled back, a mix of relief and something like embarrassment crossing his features. "Don't much like being useless." "You not useless. You heal," she corrected. "Tomorrow you help. Today you rest." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgment that they had crossed some threshold during the night's crisis. They were no longer reluctant strangers bound by circumstance, but partners with a shared purpose, survival. "One more day until they come," Elias observed quietly. Takina nodded, her expression solemn but not fearful. "We be ready." For the first time since finding her battered body in the scrub, Elias truly believed they might be. The days following the storm brought an unexpected peace to the ranch. With the Apache Council's judgment delayed by flooded creek crossings, Elias and Takina found themselves with an unexpected reprieve, time that neither wasted. The rain had transformed the parched landscape, coaxing dormant seeds to life and turning the desert scrub a surprising green. Similarly, something new had taken root between the unlikely companions, growing stronger with each passing day. Their routine developed naturally. Mornings began before sunrise, with coffee brewed strong enough, as Elias put it, to float a horseshoe. They would discuss the day's tasks over a simple breakfast, dividing labor according to strength and skill rather than any predetermined roles. At first, Elias insisted on handling the heavier work as he recovered from his fever, but Takina quickly proved herself equal to most ranch tasks. She took to horseback riding with remarkable ease, transitioning from wary respect of Sadie to confident handling within days. "Never seen anyone take to riding that natural," Elias observed one morning as she guided the mare smoothly around the corral. "You sure you never been on a horse before?" Takina sat straight in the saddle, a glimmer of pride in her usually stoic expression. "Apache women strong. Learn quick." "That you do," he agreed, genuinely impressed. The cattle presented a greater challenge. Unfamiliar with the massive beasts, Takina initially kept her distance, watching carefully as Elias demonstrated how to move among them without causing alarm. "They're like people," he explained, his hand resting casually on a young heifer's flank. "Show fear, they'll either run or challenge you. Show respect, they'll mostly do the same." By the week's end, she was helping with the daily check of the herd, her natural patience an asset when dealing with skittish calves. For her part, Takina introduced Elias to skills he'd never fully developed despite his years on the frontier. She showed him hunting techniques that used the land's contours for silent approach, tracking methods that read stories in disturbed pebbles or bent grass stems, and knowledge of desert plants that could supplement their food stores. "This one good for stomach pain," she explained, carefully digging up a particular root. "This one makes rope stronger than any you buy." The fence repairs offered another opportunity for knowledge exchange. Elias had always used traditional post and rail construction, but Takina suggested a weaving technique for certain sections that provided surprising strength with fewer materials. "This fence design, it's clever," Elias acknowledged as they completed a section together. "Where'd you learn that weaving technique?" "Same way we build brush shelters," she explained, demonstrating the pattern. "Strong against wind. Last many seasons." Later that afternoon, watching her efficiently tan a deerskin using a method he'd never seen, Elias shook his head in amazement. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," he muttered. "Took me 3 times as long to learn that." Takina paused, head tilted in confusion. "Swoggle?" The genuine bewilderment on her face sparked an unexpected chuckle from Elias. "Just means I'm impressed," he explained, the corner of his mouth lifting in a rare smile. "Reckon you might make a rancher yet." Their communication evolved beyond mere words. Working together each day, they developed a shorthand of gestures and expressions that bridged the language gap. A nod here, a pointing there. They moved in tandem with increasing harmony, needing fewer words to accomplish complex tasks. Evenings found them on the porch if weather permitted, or beside the fireplace during cooler nights. The silence between them, once tense and wary, had mellowed into comfortable companionship. It was during these quiet times that deeper exchanges emerged. "You fight in war?" Takina asked one evening, noticing how Elias absently rubbed his left knee when the weather shifted. He nodded, eyes on the flames. Union cavalry. Spent 3 years watching good men die for what folks claimed was right. Your war like Apache wars. For land? She asked. Started about slaves, Elias answered after consideration. Ended up about a lot more. Most wars do. He studied her face in the firelight. Your people fought too. Always fighting, she acknowledged. Other tribes, white soldiers, Mexican raiders, fighting part of living. Doesn't have to be, he said quietly. The conversation shifted to beliefs, each sharing fragments of their spiritual understanding. Takina explained the Apache creation stories, the sacred mountains, the importance of harmony with natural forces. Elias spoke of his simple but enduring faith, weathered by war and loss, but never abandoned. Your God and Apache spirits, not so different, Takina observed thoughtfully. Both say, be honorable, respect earth, protect family. Elias nodded slowly. Reckon folks spend too much time arguing about the name of the Creator and not enough listening to what he says. Their peaceful routine was interrupted mid-morning several days later when Jackson Miller's wagon appeared on the road to the ranch. The storekeeper made monthly deliveries to outlying homesteads, and Elias had nearly forgotten it was time for his regular visit. Morning, Elias, Jackson called as he approached, then fell silent as he noticed Takina emerging from the barn. Jackson, Elias greeted him evenly, continuing to unload supplies as though nothing were unusual. The storekeeper recovered quickly, though his eyes darted between them with poorly concealed curiosity. Storm treat you all right out here? Lost 2 bridges in town. Roof damage, some flooding. Nothing we couldn't handle, Elias replied. Jackson nodded, still watching Takina as she worked efficiently nearby. Don't believe I've met your helper. Takina, Elias said simply. She's staying here. The remainder of the delivery passed in somewhat strained conversation, with Jackson making obvious efforts to be polite, while his expression revealed growing concern. As Elias helped him hitch the team for departure, the storekeeper finally broached the subject directly. Town's talking about your arrangement here, Elias, he said in a lowered voice. Not judging myself, but others might not be so understanding. Apache woman living with a white man, folks get ideas. Appreciate the warning, Jackson, Elias replied, his tone making clear the topic was closed. But what happens on my land is my business. Jackson raised his hands in surrender. Just passing along the word. Sheriff mentioned maybe riding out to check on things. Thought you should know. After the wagon disappeared down the road, Takina approached from where she'd been working within earshot. He afraid of me, she observed without rancor. He's afraid of what he doesn't understand, Elias corrected, and what others might think. Your people believe man and woman cannot live together without, she searched for the right word, husband-wife things. Elias felt a flush creep up his neck. People always ready to think the worst. Not so different from Apache, she said with a small shrug. Humans, same everywhere. The next morning began with a routine check of the south pasture. Elias rode alongside Takina, both scanning the landscape with practiced attention. The cattle grazed peacefully, but something about their placement struck Elias as unusual. They were clustered tighter than normal, avoiding the eastern fence line. Something's got them spooked, he noted, turning Sadie toward the area the cattle were avoiding. Takina dismounted first, examining the ground with intense focus. Her fingers traced marks invisible to Elias's eye, her expression growing increasingly serious. They watch us, she said finally, pointing to seemingly ordinary arrangements of rocks and bent grass. 3 days now. Elias nodded, not questioning her assessment. Figured as much. Cattle been skittish on the South Range. Council delayed by flood, but still coming, she continued, reading more signs. 4, maybe 5 men, scouts first, then elders. The calm practicality with which she delivered this information spoke volumes about her acceptance of whatever might come. She straightened, meeting his eyes directly. "I should go," she said simply. "Draw them away from your home." Elias held her gaze steadily. "This is your home now, too. We'll face them together." Something flickered across her features. Surprise, perhaps, or an emotion deeper than her stoic expression typically revealed. "They come at dawn," she said, after a moment. "Always at dawn." "Then we'll be ready at dawn," he replied, with the same quiet certainty. They rode back to the ranch in contemplative silence, each absorbed in private thoughts. The weeks of working side by side had forged something neither had anticipated, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing trust. Whatever judgment morning might bring, they would meet it not as rescuer and victim, but as allies who had chosen their path with open eyes. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land they had tended together, Elias found himself strangely at peace. For the first time since Caroline's passing, the ranch felt truly like a home, rather than merely a place to exist. Whether that feeling would survive beyond tomorrow's confrontation remained to be seen, but he was determined to defend it with everything he had. Takina moved about the evening chores with the same calm efficiency she brought to all tasks, but Elias noted how she paused occasionally to look toward the eastern horizon, toward the people who had once been her entire world. He wondered if she felt torn, if some part of her longed to return despite the cruelty of her exile. But when their eyes met across the yard, her nod contained no hesitation, only quiet resolution. They had made their choice. Dawn would bring whatever it would bring. Dawn arrived with the soft glow that only comes after rain has cleared the air. Elias and Takina stood side by side at the edge of the ranch yard, watching the eastern horizon where the sun would soon appear. They had risen well before first light, preparing in quiet efficiency, a simple breakfast, checking weapons they hoped not to use, speaking little, but drawing strength from each other's presence. "Here they come," Elias said, gesturing toward movement on the distant ridge. Takina nodded, her face composed, but eyes revealing complex emotions beneath. 5 riders, elders, and guards. The approaching Apache delegation made no attempt at stealth. They rode in formal procession, 2 warriors in front, then what appeared to be tribal elders, followed by 2 more guards. Their approach was deliberate, dignified, allowing Elias and Takina ample time to observe their coming. As the visitors drew nearer, Elias recognized Nakohe among the warriors and noted 2 elders, a white-haired man whose bearing suggested leadership and an elderly woman whose keen eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the ranch. "Elder Chiricahua," Takina murmured, identifying the older man. "And Elder Nitika. She was my mother's cousin." Elias nodded, understanding the significance. This was no raiding party, but a formal judgment delegation with family connection. Their presence spoke of deliberation rather than impulse, wisdom rather than mere anger. The delegation halted 30 paces away. After a moment of silence that seemed to stretch endlessly, the elder named Chiricahua raised his hand in formal greeting. Takina responded with the appropriate gesture, her movements showing respect despite the circumstances. "We come to speak with Takina, daughter of Standing Elk, and the rancher who shelters her," Chiricahua announced in clear, deliberate English. "You're welcome to speak," Elias replied evenly, "but I'll ask your warriors to keep their distance." The elder studied him briefly, then nodded to the guards, who remained mounted while he and the female elder dismounted. Nakohe remained alert, but noticeably relaxed compared to the other warriors, his eyes occasionally meeting Takina's with an unreadable expression. Elder Chirikawa approached until he stood a respectful 10 paces away. "Takina, daughter of Standing Elk, you have been judged unworthy by tribal council. Yet you stand with the white man rather than accepting your fate." Takina stepped forward, her posture straight and proud despite the bruises still visible on her face. "I accept that I am no longer Apache, but I reject that I have no worth." The elder's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly at her boldness. Elder Nitika moved to stand beside him, her weathered face reflecting both tribal authority and something more personal, perhaps concern for a kinswoman, however estranged. "A woman's worth comes through her children," Nitika stated firmly. "This is our way since time began." Elias stepped forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Takina. "With respect," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Where I come from, a person's worth comes from their character and the work of their hands, and by that measure, Takina has more worth than most." An uncomfortable silence followed his words. The elders exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such direct challenge from either the exiled woman or the rancher. From the edge of the group, Nakohe unexpectedly spoke. "The rancher speaks truth," he said, drawing surprised looks from the other Apache. "I have watched them. She has become a warrior in her own way." Elder Chirikawa's eyes flashed with momentary anger at the interruption, but he said nothing to rebuke the scout. Instead, he studied Takina with renewed attention, noting her changed appearance, stronger, more confident than the broken woman who had been cast out. "You have chosen the white man's ways?" he asked finally. "I have chosen life," Takina replied simply. "The way was not my choice." The elders conferred briefly in their own language, a rapid exchange that neither Elias nor Takina could follow. The warriors remained impassive, though Nakohe's posture suggested he was listening intently to the elders' discussion. Finally, Elder Chirikawa turned back to them. "We will speak among ourselves," he announced. "Wait here." The Apache delegation withdrew a short distance, forming a tight circle where animated discussion continued in hushed tones. Occasionally, glances were cast toward Elias and Takina, who waited in dignified silence. "What do you think they'll decide?" Elias asked quietly. "I do not know," Takina replied. "But they came to talk, not fight. This is unexpected." For nearly 20 minutes, the Apache Council deliberated while the sun climbed higher in the morning sky. Finally, they returned, their faces revealing nothing of their decision. Elder Chirikawa stood before them once more, his voice taking on the formal cadence of tribal pronouncement. "Takina, daughter of Standing Elk, is no more. The woman who stands before us has chosen the white man's path." Takina met his gaze steadily. "I have chosen my own path." Something flickered across the old man's features, perhaps surprise, perhaps reluctant respect. Before he could respond, Elder Nitika stepped forward, reaching into a beaded pouch at her waist. "And walk it with courage," she said, her tone unexpectedly gentle. She withdrew a small medicine bag, intricately decorated with tribal symbols. "Take this medicine bag of your grandmother. You are not Apache, but your blood remembers." The gesture startled everyone present, including Takina, who accepted the offering with visible emotion. The medicine bag represented both acknowledgment of her heritage and permanent severance from the tribe, a paradoxical gift of remembrance and release. Elias sensed the significance of the moment and stepped forward. "Your people will always find water and safe passage on my land, Elder," he offered, extending his own gesture of peace. Elder Chiricahua considered this, then gave a single, dignified nod. "The woman is dead to us, but we acknowledge the rancher's right way. There will be peace between us." With those words, the judgment was complete. No blood had been shed, no further threats made. The Apache mounted their horses with fluid grace, preparing to depart. As they turned to leave, Nakohe lingered momentarily, meeting Takina's eyes one last time. "Live well, cousin," he said quietly, then rejoined the others. The delegation rode away as deliberately as they had arrived, disappearing over the ridge from which they had come. Elias and Takina stood watching until the last rider vanished from sight, the morning sun now fully risen on a day neither had been certain they would see. Takina remained motionless, the medicine bag clutched tightly in her hand, her eyes fixed on the empty horizon. "Part of me leaves with them," she said finally. Elias nodded, understanding what it meant to watch the last connection to your past ride away. "I know," he said simply. They returned to the ranch house in thoughtful silence, each processing what had just occurred. The confrontation they had feared had instead become a kind of ceremony, painful but necessary, closing one chapter while opening another. As the day progressed, Takina moved through her tasks with quiet efficiency, but Elias noted the occasional moment when she would pause, touching the medicine bag she now wore at her waist, her eyes distant with memories. He gave her the space to grieve what she had lost, understanding that some journeys must be walked alone, even between friends. By afternoon, clouds had begun to gather once more, but these were gentle, promising rather than threatening. As the first soft drops of rain began to fall, Elias found Takina standing by the corral, watching the shower approach across the distant pasture. "Should get the new beam up on that north section before it gets too wet," he observed, gesturing to lumber they had prepared the previous week. Takina looked at the sky, then back to him, something resolving in her expression. She nodded and moved toward the tools without being asked, falling into their familiar work pattern. The rain increased steadily as they worked, but neither suggested stopping. There was something cleansing in the labor, something healing in the cool drops that washed away dust and sweat alike. "Apache believe rain washes away what was," Takina said, as they secured the final support, "makes room for what will be." Elias straightened, testing the beam with a satisfied nod. Good rain. Land needed it. They stood together in the gentle downpour, surveying the ranch that had somehow become their shared domain. The improvements they had made together were visible everywhere. Repaired fences, the strengthened barn, new irrigation channels that would direct this rainfall to where it was most needed. Takina's gaze moved to an undeveloped section beyond the existing corral. "Come spring, we could add another pasture there," she suggested, the future tense containing its own quiet declaration. Elias looked where she pointed, mentally calculating the work involved, seeing the potential through her eyes. His response came without hesitation, as natural as the rain itself. "We'll do that," he said, the simple words sealing a partnership neither had sought but both had found. As they walked back to the house, side by side, through the cleansing rain, no further words were needed. The medicine bag at Takina's waist swung gently with each step, a reminder of what had been. But her eyes were fixed forward, toward the ranch house that had become her home, toward the future that stretched before them, unwritten, uncharted, but faced together. The rain continued through the evening, nourishing the parched earth and washing the world clean, just as it had after the storm that had first bound their fates together. In its gentle rhythm, both found a kind of peace, not the peace of completion, but the richer peace of new beginning. You know, my daddy used to say that the good Lord puts people in our path for a reason, even when it looks like trouble at first glance. I've pondered on that wisdom many times during my 76 years on this good earth, and that old Apache woman's story sure brings it to mind clear as a bell. When Elias Ward found Takina beaten and half dead in that scrub brush, most men would have kept riding. Can't blame 'em, really. Those were hard times in hard country, and getting between an Apache and their tribal business was asking for the kind of trouble that often ended with a man's scalp decorating someone's belt. But sometimes the measure of a life ain't found in the troubles you avoid, but in the ones you walk straight into with your eyes wide open and your heart following what's right. I reckon each of us has faced that crossroads at least once, that moment when doing what's safe and doing what's right stand on opposite sides of the trail. Most times, we want the good Lord to give us clear signs about which way to turn, but He seems to prefer letting us figure it out ourselves. Character gets built in those silent moments of choosing, not in the thunder and lightning we'd prefer. Elias and Takina both lost what they thought they needed before finding what they truly required. She lost her people, her standing, her very identity as an Apache woman. He'd already lost his Caroline, then nearly lost the independence he'd built his life around. Ain't that just the way of it, though? Sometimes we cling hardest to the very things that keep us from growing. There's a special kind of wisdom that comes from watching life long enough. You start seeing patterns in the way the good Lord works, how often the worst storms bring the most needed rain, how the heaviest burdens build the strongest backs, how the deepest wounds sometimes make way for the greatest healing. That old ranch had stood empty of true life since Caroline passed. The buildings were there, the cattle were tended, but the heart was missing until someone needed Elias more than he needed his solitude. I've known men who died alone with nothing but their pride for company, and I've known others who found family in the strangest of places because they were willing to set that pride aside. The measure of a life well lived ain't in what you managed to hold on to, but in what you were brave enough to share when sharing came at a cost. Next time life drops an unexpected burden in your path, remember old Elias and Takina. What looks like trouble just might be the very blessing you've been needing all along. And sometimes the family you find matters more than the one you're born to. That's something I've found to be the Lord's honest truth every single time.